Thanks, Omar. Well, I'm going to talk to you today about the eclectic career I've had, but in particular I'm going to talk to you about the beginning of drugs. Now, many of you would pick up aspirin in the supermarket, pick up some penicillin from your doctor, but have you ever thought about where that began? And the research I'm working on at the moment is developing a new drug, and it's a very new beginning, and it's a potential therapy for motor neuron disease. Now, motor neuron disease is a terminal disease. It affects the motor neurons, which means after about 5 years from diagnosis, people stop being able to move their arms, their legs, they can't speak, they can't swallow, eventually they can't breathe and they pass away. Stephen Hawking has this disease. So I work with some colleagues all over the world. There's about 20 of us, and about 30 years ago, my colleague, who's an ethnobotanist, now that's kind of like a medicine man, he goes out into the jungles of the Amazon, of Samoa. He went into the jungles of Guam because the indigenous people of Guam, who are called the Chamorro people, were developing a very strange disease. And it was kind of like Parkinson's disease, it was a little bit like motor neuron disease, and he tried to work out why they were getting more of it than anybody else in the community. And what he found was fascinating. He found that they were eating bats. Their favourite food is fruit bats. And they make a fruit bat soup where they take the whole bat and they cook it up in coconut broth, and they boil that and they eat everything. They eat the skin, the wings, and all of the broth. Now it turns out when he looked at these bats, he found they contained a special toxin, which is a neurotoxin, and that's called BMAA, and this is a toxin that you also find in algae. Now, blue-green algae, many of you would be familiar with. It's ubiquitous, you'll find it everywhere. It grows and blooms in the oceans, it blooms in lakes, and as Australians we're used to hearing alerts for there's blue-green algae at a dam, or there's blue-green algae in a river. And in fact, in 1992, we like big things in Australia, don't we? We had the world's largest algal bloom in the Barwon-Murray Basin, the world's largest freshwater bloom. So what was interesting about these bats, the link between the bats and the algae, is that the bats like to eat the seeds of trees called cycads, and cycads grow in them this blue-green algae. And within this blue-green algae contains this compound called BMAA. Now, what's the link to this to motor neuron disease? Well, what he was able to find was because these people were eating these fruit bats, they had a very high concentration of this neurotoxin. And if you look around the world at patients that have Alzheimer's disease, patients that die from motor neuron disease, they often find this neurotoxin lodged in their brain. Some of you may have heard of the link between soldiers who went to the Gulf War and have an increased incidence of getting motor neuron disease. And the theory behind this is that this also grows in the deserts of Qatar, and when you walk behind tanks to keep warm at night, it makes dust, and you breathe in the dust and you absorb this neurotoxin. So there's another interesting link to this algae as well. And many of you would have heard of the film The Bats by Alfred Hitchcock. Sorry, The Birds by Alfred Hitchcock. Bats, you've got bats in the brain. Now this is actually based on a true story, which was written by Daphne du Maurier in 1952. She was walking in Cornwall in the UK with her dog, and she was attacked by seagulls, and this inspired her to write the noveletta called The Birds. Now in 1961, on August the 17th, in Santa Cruz, the town was attacked at about 3 o'clock in the morning by a flock of sooty shearwaters. And they were described the next day in the paper as flying around into houses, flying into letterboxes, flying into people. And this is of course what the film is based on. And at the time, biologists thought that these birds possibly got disorientated by fog. Now years later, when we've worked out that these algae grow in the ocean, it's now thought that actually these birds had eaten some sort of fish, like anchovies, that had eaten this algae. And so this links to disorientation, and so they were in fact disorientated, so they were flying into people. So this is also gives us a connection back to the disease in humans, which is motor neuron disease. And the thing we've been able to work out now is that there are lots of places in the world where this particular neurotoxin is available in drinking water, also in recreational water, not so much in drinking water, it tends to be purified out, but it can possibly link to this disease. And we just got a patent last year where we're hoping that we now have a therapy because we've been able to work out the connection between the fruit bats of Guam, the indigenous people, the birds in the Hitchcock film, and motor neuron disease. Thank you.